So are there OC equivalents in the US?
Um, there's not an OC equivalent. There's a company called Chestnut Carbon who are brilliant. Um, they just do the woodland part of it. Um, so we went to New York Climate Week across with them. They invited us to so many events, and it was almost like they'd pivoted their cocktail party to be like a pro OC party. And their general counsel, what's his name? Jesse, a guy called Jesse. He was walking us around going, "These guys are the ones who've got the better developed business model to us. We need to be more like them." And of our triangle, they own the land, but they only own the bit that specifically relates to the woodland. So they don't buy the rest of the estate. They don't buy built property. They'd go and buy the corner of a field, and they'd say, "Right, we're going to do a 200-acre plantation there." So, for example, we've got 50,000 acres. When we last spoke to them, they had 60,000 in the US. We've got 12 estates. How many estates do you think they've got over 60,000 acres?
Probably one.
300.
300?
Yeah.
I just thought it'd been huge
Exact
parcels.
we thought the
Yeah,
exact same thing, but
yeah.
they buy, like, the spare bits at the edge, but
Right.
because the scale's so massive, those spare
Yeah,
bits are still quite large,
yeah.
but they purely do planting, so whereas we would do native broadleaf woodland on sort of 20-30% of the estate, they'll do it on 80% of the pocket.
Right.
So it's much more of an intense
Mhm.
product they're doing, and you wouldn't get the same social benefits, environmental
Yeah,
benefits and things, but you do get a higher carbon yield.
yeah.
So they do that aspect of it. What they liked was, oh, we could overlay the ecotourism part of it. We could start thinking about nature. So, but they've done the most sort of advanced commercial terms with Microsoft, and they've got, I think it's a, I want to say 8 million ton offtake agreement over multiple years. So it's a huge deal. But they are starting to come now. And even in the UK, we're starting across our triangle of like land, natural capital, renewables, property, ecotourism. We're starting to see every week another company pop up in one of those
Right,
horizontals, but not multiple usually.
right.
So
Interesting.
we should probably tell people who you are and what we do, shouldn't we?
Let's do that. Yeah. So I'm Mark. I'm the chief executive of Triodos Bank in the UK. Absolutely delighted to be here today, Rich. To be fair, back on Monocot. So loved our visit a couple of months ago. Great to be back. And it's great to be in the chair at Triodos.
That's where I want to start. What's been the best thing about becoming chief exec at Triodos?
Oh, you know what? There's so many things. I mean, firstly, it's an immense honour to be able to be asked to lead the bank in the UK. Really, because of everything the bank stands for and sort of the alignment with me and my my personal values. Uh, I've had I'm backed by a really strong management team in the UK, which is wonderful. Bevis left a great legacy. Obviously, Bevis really well, and he's been down here before. Um, but I think it's the knowledge in the end that everything we're doing, we are doing for positive impact. And there'll be lots of organisations who have to worry about the skeletons in their closet, and we're not one of them, which is great. So the principle of Triodos, which is about human dignity on a thriving planet, as the vision that we aim for, is something that is naturally very inspiring. Um, and then there's a sort of a both a customer and a co-worker dynamic. So in terms of our co-workers, genuinely, I've never, I've worked in three businesses, but when I was working at HSBC, it's like when you're in a massive bank, it's like working in lots of businesses. I've never worked anywhere where the passion for the mission of the organization from your co-worker teams is so aligned and so clear. I mean, it was my first day in the bank was January 2024, and it like hit you the moment you walked through the door. And so, the fact that I'm now sort of helping lead the entire bank is amazing. And then we're lucky, but with hard work, we've got a really loyal customer base, and that's really clear. Customers come to us for a very specific reason, knowing that we have a commitment to do good with our customers' money. Um, and then if I think about just the sectors that we're in, we've got relationship managers, obviously natural capital, as you know very well, but across healthcare, social care, charitable enterprises, arts and culture, renewables and energy. So all of those teams, some fantastic people doing really great things on a daily basis. Um, and then for me, the bit that I'm sort of getting to learn more about in role is it's almost like the plus plus of being in role, which is the advocacy. So the fact that we are, a very clearly an activist organization, not just a bank. And we will be out there campaigning for change. So we talk about both financing change, but changing finance. And so, we're probably, we're one of the few that is actually actively looking at how would we change the financial system for the better or the economic system for the better. So we've got and we have a really big team in the Netherlands that really leads on this. Independent economists that can put out what they feel is right. It's not a bank view; it's an independent economist view. And then we've got a smaller team of an advocacy team in the UK that really drive for change in the UK context as opposed to an EU context. So, like, just an example, a couple of months in role, my CFO Sarah, she was out back in 0 hour, knocking on the door of 10 Downing Street with 650 letters back in the climate and nature bill, for example. And these are the kind of things that are really exciting. And from an advocacy perspective, and then where really, I'm really sort of excited as I've started to explore what I call the ecosystem or partners of Triodos to really start thinking about all of the customers we've got and built up over the years that have got huge loyalty to us, and we've got huge loyalty to them. And how do you start to leverage that partnership system in a way that becomes really interesting in advocating for each other? So there's loads there, Rich, to be honest with you, but it's just great to be in role, and I just feel really lucky to be able to lead the organisation at this time.
What are the chapters of your life we need to understand to know the person who's sat opposite us today?
Good question. So I guess if I go right back, as obviously there's simple life chapter and there's work chapters. So from a home perspective, born and bred in Sheffield or bred just south of Sheffield. Um, uh, Lived in a actually really lovely village, really nice, happy, safe upbringing, but really interesting times. Sheffield in the 1980s was massive boom and bust economics. You've got the almost simultaneous collapse of coal and mining and steel. And that was really clear. My dad ran a business right in the industrial heartland of Sheffield. And so when you went through the city as a child, you could see the challenges. I mean, they were very, very stark. My mum was a care assistant at a school. I remember my mum going back to work when times were really hard, or times were hard when we were young. Um, One of four boys, so how on earth my mum and dad cope with that, I don't know. And I feel I see myself as just having very humble working class roots in the end. And so, amongst my family, there was sort of builders, miners, roofers. There were most of my uncles or older cousins sort of trades. So very unusual for somebody who sort of went into banking. It's fair to say when I did. Um, but surrounding the village where we lived, I mean, it's a really interesting part of the world. Was lots of sort of former mining villages, and the school that I went to was in a former mining village. So in my friendship group, you were acutely aware of sort of social differences and social inequality. I'd go to some friends' houses, great friends, but you could see that their parents really didn't have a lot at all. And so I don't know how much of that you think intensely about as a child, but actually as an adult, I've reflected a lot more of it and sort of um, sort of the social inequality that I've noticed through my life. Um, and so that's kind of gave me a real perspective on life because actually, what I also saw within those communities is some of the most charitable people you could ever meet. I've often thought some of the most charitable people are people who don't actually have anything. Um, and so there's a social shaping there. I think it's fair to
In
say
terms of that
that's
time period, how has that informed how you think about the concept of a just transition in the economy?
yeah. Do you know what I think?
Because when we were growing up, that wasn't a phrase,
No,
right?
it
I
wasn't.
hadn't heard that probably in the last 2 or 3 years, maybe.
Yeah, it wasn't, and probably even when the I mean, the phrase now is several years old, but when it first started, I don't think I overly thought about it. I was busy getting on with my own life, and I think when I think about my life and career, there's many moments, but actually, I'm a really deeply reflective person. Sometimes I'm an over reflector and overthinker, which can be a bit of a challenge. But there's a package of things that have built up through my life that gets me to something, and so. for many years, I wouldn't really think about it. I think it's more as since I stepped into ethical banking through Unity and then through Triodos that I've thought about it much more intensely and become much more acutely aware of that inequality. So I think there was something that was always in me. I've always fought for the underdog, I think, as a result of a lot of what I experienced when I was younger. But that awareness has really grown as a result of many experiences over the years. So some of that is through, family life, and then some of that is through work life and the things that I experienced over, the first 20 odd years of my career. Um, and that because I think, what I don't mind sharing, I've shared with many people. I think when I was the first member of my family ever to go to university. Um, Very curious. My parents were absolutely curious that I ever wanted to go into banking. It's like, where did that ever come from? There's nobody like that in our family. And even I don't really know, if I'm being honest with you. Um, and then for quite a while, I feel like I sort of just jumped on the hamster wheel of trying to make a decent life for myself. And I don't mean hamster wheel as in like trying to climb a greasy pole, like the corporate ladder, so to speak, but just trying to do well in life and working hard. My parents taught me the values of like hard work, integrity, honesty, and they're sort of really deep in my core. And so for many years, I just kind of cracked on with life and tried to build a career. I think my children coming along from about 2007 onwards were probably the first time in my life that you start to realize that actually there's life that's more important now than mine, and that what you care for your children and the world that they're going to grow into actually just took on an entirely different meaning when they came along.
And it makes you more acutely aware of time, I think, as well,
Yeah,
because they grow and change so much every day
yeah,
that you're no longer the center of attention. You have to negotiate for everything, including going to the bathroom by
yeah,
yourself, and it just makes you more aware, I think.
yeah. No, I think it does. You're right. I mean, I think I've thought a lot about legacy and the passage of time as a result of having children, than more so than when I did
Mate, and we're
before.
getting old.
Yeah, well, there
It
is
does
that.
that as well.
Yeah. Well, my son calls me old man all the time, so
It's a
I
compliment.
get a daily reminder of it. Um, and then I think there's sort of a package of things from a work context as well. So I sort of obviously spent most of my career at HSBC. I had a wonderful career there, and I worked with fantastic people, I have to say.
Help people
Um,
understand the scale of the business when you were there in terms of just how vast HSBC was.
yes, I mean, just in terms of employees, when I first joined there, I'm pretty sure globally it was a quarter of a million employees.
I mean,
Um,
that's
Which is obviously absolutely insane. In the UK, I think it was 40,000. It might have even been 50,000 at that particular
yeah.
time when I joined.
That's a
And
significant football stadium
yeah,
full of people, or rugby, depending on your
yeah,
persuasion, full of just HSBC employees.
yes, indeed. I mean, obviously, globally, it's the size of a city,
Yeah.
small city, effectively. So it was absolutely vast. And with that comes obviously some fantastic opportunities. And of course, obviously, there's always downsides of large organizations and the navigation of that and all of those things. But I think if I think sort of through my life journey, obviously there are lots and lots of positives there, but and this actually is not about HSBC. It's more about, I guess, finance and the sector of finance. I came through the branch network during the PPI crisis. I came through the banking sector during the financial crisis. I've sort of seen over the years the need for the regulator to impose regulations on things that should not need to be imposed. I mean, I've often shared this. I think it was back 2013 when the regulator introduced, a regulation called treating customers fairly. And you sit there and think, does that mean we're not treating customers fairly? Like what's going on in the finance industry when people who are our neighbours or our family members who are not being treated fairly? And in a way, I can remember at the time almost feeling slightly offended by it because I'm like, to my values, this is not how I treat people. But I remember about the same time this was coming in, and I was sharing with somebody earlier in the week that I got a letter at the time from my mortgage provider. And it's probably one of the only letters I've ever remembered getting from any sort of bank or finance provider. But the letter basically was saying, your fixed rate is about to expire. You're going to move on to a variable rate. Here's your rate. You don't need to do anything. And I looked at it and I thought, but that rate is significantly higher than the one I'm was on. Why are you telling me not to do anything? That's going to cost me a lot of money. You should be saying do something now to protect yourself. And I've always remembered that letter as a this is why these regulations are needed. But all of these little moments, I think, kind of led me on this journey towards, what became more ethical and values based principles.
How do we end up in a situation whereby the individual human beings, the people you were working with on a day-to-day basis, were good people who wanted to do the right things for the customer, but the collective corporate being that was a bank
Yeah.
sends that letter? How does that happen?
That's a really hard question to answer because it's a great question. Because you're absolutely right. You're working with people who are great people. Um, but people come with different experiences and different lenses. So there are people in any organization who might not be thinking in the same way about ethics and principles and might be thinking much more about their ambition, their desire to drive greater profit. What does that feel like from a personal perspective? And organizations have
And
all
that's
sorts
not
of people in
fundamentally
there.
bad, right? So to
No.
you and I have talked about, to be a good business, you have to be in business.
Yeah.
To provide jobs and opportunities for people, you need to be profitable.
Yep.
Ergo, making a profit itself is not a bad thing,
Yep.
but it's not without its consequences.
Indeed, yeah, indeed. We all have to be financially sustainable, or we don't exist in business at all in the end. Um, but it was really interesting to your point, and I don't know all of the answers because I think it's any business, large business in particular, is an unbelievably complex organism. That effectively there is a direction set that people are aiming for that can lead to outcomes that are not always the right outcomes for people. And I guess when I sort of there were definitely a couple of moments that really led me sort of down more values based, which maybe I'll come back to. But I think as I sort of got further down my career, I think there was a realization for me that a lot of business can be driven by short termism. There's a lot of short term thinking for either profit or because there are demands of the shareholders. So, this in the end is the economic system in which we operate, and the demands of shareholders for better returns can drive certain thinking, either within organizations or direction from boards of directors. And I think when I reflected and obviously talk to a lot of friends and colleagues across lots of different businesses and lots of different industries. That's something that sort of torn at me more as I've got older. There's almost that termism is not helping anybody in the end. It helps a few people in the short term, um, but also I kind of started to just gain this view that a sense that in the largest places, I think there can be a disconnect between boards of directors who drive shareholder value, and is that always the best thing for either planet or people? And often it's not, in fairness. And so, I mean, maybe that is the answer to your question, which is that direction from set from the top and the economic system in which we operate can lead to some of those behaviors in people who are otherwise good people and not intending to do harm or damage. Um, there was, I mean, just to wind back a little bit, I'd say there was probably it's a couple of things, but maybe one kind of big moment. As I say, there's lots of packages of moments, but I think it's about 2013, I got the permission to set up a financial wellbeing business at HSBC, and it was the term well-being was not a common
Just
phrase at
before you
that
tell the
time. Yeah,
story, my assumption would be getting permission for a new enterprise and part of the business in a machine like that
yeah.
is not a simple thing to achieve.
No, it's not. It's not. You had to sell a really compelling narrative, and it wasn't simple for an even bigger reason, which is it wasn't just about going out and selling the bank's products. So I would
Yeah, there's not
absolutely
an immediate line to this is
no,
profitable tomorrow because.
absolutely not. And so I'd absolutely take my hat off to the senior management team that backed me to do
Well, that's
this.
back to our point about they were good human beings and people you're
Yes.
working with.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, the principle of the business was about, and certainly a lot of my positioning was this was only a few years out of financial crisis. Trust in banking was at an all-time low. And this was about delivering independent education on site in companies to their employees, about different financial themes, but that did not talk about the bank's products, and therefore did not expect there to be a sale. There was not a sales pitch through this. We had a very simple notion of building trust, and we had a very simple notion that says we're all human beings going out and presenting this. And if people like us, they might want to keep talking to us. But at the same time, if people took the education and went to their bank and used that education for their own financial well-being and benefit, then that was seen as a plus. And so the model itself was really interesting. There was very little out there at the time on financial well-being. The thing though that really got me, Rich, was that to make this work, we needed to galvanize expertise from across the branch network. So imagine we were delivering one day in Darlington, the next day in Taunton, the next day in Ipswich, for example. You needed people on the ground to want to be a part of it. And that was the thing that absolutely blew me away, which was the passion of our staff from across the branch network to say, I've actually got these skills that I've built up over years and I'm happy to go and use them and give something back, was the thing that really got me, because there was this thing that said, actually, this is a different side to banking, but actually it's about the humanity of it and the human connection that's been driven for this. And that for me was, I think, my first really big moment that said, this is where banking can be better and where people have got great skills that can be used for good. Um, and that, I led that business for many years, and there was
Do
many
you
other
think
moments along
do you
the way.
think
But
that's when you became the leader you are now? Do you think that's the first step to being the type of leader you are?
I think that was definitely one of the first steps. And it wasn't the only step, but I felt really lucky at the time that I led a really interesting Premier team doing very, very different things. Um, but amongst that, there was an element of me developing as a person, growing in terms of my confidence and courage. And that entire team that I was leading at that time started at 30 people. And when I left, it was about 330 people, across different business units. So I learned a lot personally about the power of authenticity, and growing your own leadership style and being able to step away from, sometimes in any organization, you'll see certain leadership styles that you're really not comfortable with and don't want to follow. And I think through leading a team of that size and recognizing, for example, that not everybody in that team needs to agree with your views, but they're really interested to know what they are. And you shouldn't be ashamed or embarrassed about sharing what they are. I think there's a whole load of things through that time that grew me to what I am. If I'm being honest, actually, I'd probably say there was a big element of that from my leadership journey, but without my journey to unity trust, I categorically would not be sat in the chair and talking to you today.
Before we leave HSBC, what's the difference, skill set, personality, experience-wise, you need to lead 330 people versus 30 people?
Um, I'd say actually, there's a lot that's not different, to be fair, because the basic tenets of really great leadership and the humanity and the authenticity shouldn't really matter how big your team is in the end. Um, but there are things of a team. The team of 330 was spread over different geographies around the UK. So being able to bring the whole team on that journey, like particularly from a people perspective and a connectivity perspective, does require some different sort of systems thinking, for example. And then maybe as a simple example of that, I'd sort of got three main geographies, which were Birmingham, London, and Swansea. And we'd also got a team down in Southampton. And recognizing one of the things I felt really proud about was building a great people culture, fantastic employee engagement scores. I felt really proud that people in HSBC would want to come and work in my team and actively seek it out. And one of the things we did, for example, in each of those geographies was to find the co-workers who were the most passionate about people development and people engagement, and then give them license and freedom to operate. And each one of them created their own people team, but all connected to sort of the mission and values of our team. As a team, we had very clear mission and value statements about how we wanted to be and how we wanted to behave, and they were very emotionally driven. And all of those teams took that and ran with it in terms of customer stories, driving charitable work, charitable contributions, and all of that then created an ecosystem around people and culture. So I think there are some differences from that perspective, but the basic tenet shouldn't really be any different in my view.
On to Unity.
Yes, so Unity was, Unity was so different. So it was, I joined in March 2020. I think I was in the office for 5 days before we went into lockdown. It was an absolute baptism of fire. I joined as the COO there, Chief Operating Officer, and I went from a bank of 40,000 people to a bank of 95 people, and it was so different. And it was unquestionably the hardest
I mean,
and best
literally
thing I've ever
everything's
done.
different, right?
Everything is different.
Everything.
Everything is different. And in fairness, when I was joining, the CEO Margaret said to me, "What you're going to realise now, Mark, that is that despite 23 years in a big bank, is that your knowledge is very deep but incredibly narrow on the subjects that you know. You're now going to see how an entire business runs from end to end, and you'll find it really exposing. And in 6 months' time, you'll decide to leave because you just won't be able to deal with it, or you'll learn to adapt and survive effectively."
Do you remember how you felt when she first told you that?
You know what? I sort of, I wasn't really bothered when she first said it because I thought I've got 23 years of experience in a professional organisation. I'm going to be absolutely fine. I've reached a senior level. This is not going to be a problem. It didn't take me long before I realised that I was completely exposed. Completely exposed. I was suddenly running teams and disciplines after 20 that during my 23 years I had never done before. And so we were sort of helping navigate COVID, going on this massive learning experience. And, one of the things, I had this enormous network at HSBC, and suddenly you've lost your network. So you're not studying on solid
Mm,
foundations.
for people who it might be difficult for them to understand the importance of network, but this isn't in like a soft braggadocious way. In large organizations and in business in general, your network is your speed and ability to
Yeah,
execute, right? Because you knew who to ring for the answer on a question or the permission on
yeah,
something or the governance. So
yeah.
all of a sudden, those pathways, those maps,
Correct.
completely gone, right?
Correct. And despite the fact that it was obviously an enormous global organization, I understood how to navigate it
Yeah.
over those times. And I've often thought you don't realize how big your network is actually until you're out the door. So, when
It's
I
like
sort
going to
of,
a different country and you've got a sat nav for somewhere else.
yeah,
All of a sudden, you don't have that anymore. You've
no,
got to work your way through the
no.
routes.
I mean, when I left the bank and I sort of put on sort of my LinkedIn post got 24,000 views and hundreds of comments. I'm like, I didn't realize my network was this big, sort of thing, but it was. And you're right. And so you don't lose it entirely, of course, because you still keep in touch with those people, but it's very, very
Very
different
different. Yeah.
and very exposing. And so there was this sort of near vertical learning curve. You'd lost that, and then there's sort of this difference, which is in any big organization where there's very, very deep pockets and deep budgets, your ability to tap into expertise, learning. At HSBC, there was an HSBC University. I went to go to courses where you'd get access to like Harvard professors, amazing thinkers, right at the top of their game. Um, and suddenly you're in a small organization without the budgets, without all of those learning opportunities, and you're suddenly exposed, and you're like, "Well, I better Google it then and try and work out an answer." And that in itself was tough. Um, at the same time then, I think I was about 18 months into role, and I was then asked to lead the IT function as well as various other functions I was leading, and I can honestly say if I would put a list of all of the things I want to do in my career, that was not be I wouldn't even put it on it. Um, and then I went, having got myself settled.
Ask presupposes there was a choice there. There wasn't a choice, right?
Not really,
No,
no. I
excellent.
mean,
Okay.
the COO of a small bank, it's pretty hard to say no. Like,
Yeah.
there were some sort of structural changes. It's like, yeah, this is going to happen whether I like it or not. And that again then became a vertical learning curve. In fact, a vertical learning curve, and almost like learning a foreign language, having never worked in that space. I mean, I'd sometimes say to the teams, I said I did French for 2 years at school. and I remember little bits of it. I feel like when I talk to you, I'm having a conversation in French and you think I understand all the words. That's how it started before I then really got my head around sort of the world of technology and just not like some of the trendy fast technology, but like some of the really deep things that you have to do in
Because we
terms
all
of
take
running
it
the
for
core
granted,
banking
right? We
system.
just
Yeah.
we turn things on, we expect them to work, but the engineering that goes on in the background to make that possible is incredibly
It's on
complicated.
another level
Yeah.
in ways you can't until you're in it, you can't understand it.
Especially in such a regulated, protected,
Yeah,
secure world as banking.
correct. Yeah, correct. And, all small banks will run lots of legacy. Well, actually, some of the modern fintechs don't have it, but if you're a legacy bank, you're running legacy systems and all those challenges. So again, it was really tough. But if I take all of the package of all of those things, despite the things that you know, don't exist in a professional organization and not a bigger organization. I mean, it's the best thing I've ever done in my life. It was a singly hardest thing, the most exposing, the most uncomfortable. And then when I kind of came out of it and kind of got to Triodos, what was amazing was all of those things in that sort of 4 years at Unity just sort of land clicked into place. Is how I felt.
What did So you got that amazing learning. You can see you beaming about your experience there of how much you enjoyed it. What did it cost you personally to do that though? What did you have to sacrifice, give up? Because life's not a 100% process. So you would have invested time and energy and effort in there. What was the cost of that?
That's a great question. Do you know what? I'm not sure there was one. Um, I've often talked about, as you sort of, well, as you get promoted through the years in different organisations, it doesn't mean therefore you have to work harder and harder and harder in every role. In fact, I'd sort of reached a level where I'd say to people, if I do this role or that role, I'm already working pretty full on, very committed, and trying to work out the right balance for me. So it's not about an hours thing. I think there's an emotional cost and a mental cost. And I guess for me, I probably did go from a role in which in the end I felt very comfortable and probably wasn't learning, if I'm being honest. In my last role, in the end, I'd done it for 6 years and was in comfortable territory. So I think there's an emotional burden rather than an hours burden, if that makes sense. And and I think I noticed through certainly through my time at Unity and then again I think at Triodos is the need to protect some element of my mental, well-being and find my own time to really, as I said earlier, I'm reflective. So time to my own time to reflect and needing more time to reflect. I think that was probably the big difference for me.
What are the tools and techniques you've developed to make that reflection a tool, not a burden?
Um, well, I mean, I've tried all sorts over the years. I've tried mindfulness and various other things, and kind of curious about what works and doesn't work for me personally, because I think it's different for everyone. In the end, being really simple, I just realized that being out in my garden or being out in nature is my version of mindfulness. It's where I can do my relaxation, my creativity. I can think about the week that's gone and often solve the problems in my head I couldn't solve in the week, or in some case, sort of unleash the emotional burden of things that might have frustrated me, where I can just try and think about them differently, put myself in the shoes of, either a person or a situation or whatever it is that might be carrying baggage into the weekend, for example. And then I've also found it's great preparation for the week that's coming. So you're knowing that there might be certain big moments that might feel more difficult or more stressful or just need a lot of preparation. And for me, it's just become the garden. And at the same time, then I'm out in nature. I love being out. I actually don't really know, if I'm being honest, how I ended up in a career in an office. I really am an outdoors person at my heart, and so that obviously gives me a lot of fulfillment. So I get up in the morning at the weekend and I look outdoors and I know that's where I want to be. And then I think my wife knows that if she needs me to do anything in the house, it's going to be really difficult because I'm down the garden somewhere and it's very hard to drag me back in the house, basically.
Um, Before you left Unity for Triodos, what did you think of Triodos Bank?
So I thought two things. One is I thought I genuinely thought that Triodos was the premium ethical brand in the UK. It's got a
And I think that's universally accepted. I don't think
yes,
I've ever heard anyone say anything but.
yeah, I think that's
That
right.
that's how we ended up working with Triodos in the first place, that we were very fortunate in the space of, I think I've told you this story. In the space of about a 2-month period, we had 13 different offers of investment or capital or people trying to buy us in one way, shape, or another, and the only one we wanted to
Yeah,
entertain was the partnership because we felt it was, amplifying and catalytic for the sector as a whole.
yeah, yeah,
So
which is fantastic. I mean, and I must admit, I wouldn't have had as deep a knowledge of all the things that Triodos was doing. But I could absolutely see now I'm in sort of the shoes or in the organisation. I can absolutely see why you would have got there, and many others have as well. Um, I also felt though at that time, and actually I now know there's good reasons because the organisation, for example, was subsidiarising post Brexit, that the organisation was quite quiet, and it made me wonder, like, is it quite insular in its in not in its thinking because actually it's very broad in its systems thinking, but in its approach, I wouldn't have seen Triodos out in the market in the way that I might have expected, given that I saw it as a premium brand. So there were the two sides that I felt that I saw on the way in.
and how did the move across come about, and when was that?
Yeah, so it was January 2024 that I moved.
You do like a change in January, right?
Yeah, I don't know why. I mean, it's every time to take some time out. It's not really January, if I'm being honest,
So
but
we love actually, my brain's always been wired. I've always changed job at the end of a year into another,
yeah,
and mine comes from a sporting thing. So, in the NFL, all the head coaches get sacked in December. It's called Black Monday after the season finishes, and that's where all the change in roles happens, and then they start new jobs in the new year.
right.
And I always love recruiting in that period because throughout my career, I've found you'll get someone really talented who sat at home at Christmas going, I don't really want to go back to
Mm,
that. I want to do something different. So people who wouldn't be looking normally because they're so busy, they're going
I
through the
do.
process, they're reflecting on their next steps. Now, I appreciate for you to go somewhere in January, that's happened months
Yes.
before that.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a freshness, there's a reinvigoration, there's an opportunity to start something new in January.
Yeah.
So I
I think
quite
that's a
like that.
really good observation. I can absolutely see that. I could easily see why that would be true. Um, so for me, my sort of journey leaving Triodos, Unity started much earlier than that. So it was earlier in 2023, and and this is actually is a realization that when you're in the around an exco table, every exco member has a shelf life. I remember very early in my sort of career at Unity, where one of the very first meetings and the discussion item was about um, like, so when are we all leaving, sort of thing. Not that we're all leaving together, but the need to plan and think about exco succession. And
What determines those parameters? What sets someone's shelf life for a person or a role?
well, I guess if I talk about my shelf life at Unity, I think maybe is a good example of it, which is that I feel really proud of a lot of things that I did and achieved at Unity, but in the IT space in particular, we went from I guess maybe some more basic IT technology to the time that I was leaving, we were beginning to do lots of migration into the cloud, very, very well, much naturally higher risk, much more technical work. And, there was a view, I think, at that point, which I completely support, that this was a time for having a COO who was a pure technical COO rather than me, who was a generalist COO. So I feel proud of the work that I did, but I didn't want to be a technical COO. That's not where I would want my career to be. It's also not the picture I would paint of myself. So I think it's an example of the natural evolution of an organization, and therefore looking for the right skills that sit around the exco table. And where we were heading is probably not where I'd want to be, or and actually make me not necessarily the right person to be the next CEO of
And was
Unity.
that openly discussed? So was there a sort of open conversation of, we're each filling roles that and the business is adapting and that will move, or it's more something you all internally knew and it was just accepted?
It's a little bit of I think internally you know it, and there are definitely discussions. So as I said, like we would have open discussions as an exco about succession. Um, but I think also there's something which is quite personal. Ultimately, the CEO of the bank has to kind of plan all of those different moving parts.
Yeah.
You know, in support with the board. So it's not just about. the exco succession, you've also got to think about the board succession that's coming with it. So there's multiple different parts of that jigsaw moving around,
I
basically.
love that. It's one of the things I enjoy most about having and running a business is that interplay of that.
Yeah,
And a phrase we use a lot is OC isn't for everyone and it isn't for everyone forever.
yeah,
And that kind of jars with people early in their career, but it's exactly as you articulate then. So, we have people that might come into the business for 2 or 3 years and have amazing contributions during that chapter and time period, but then they don't want to work in the
yeah,
business that it will become in 3 years and the next three and the next three.
yeah,
And I don't want to run a sorry, microphone. I never want to work in a 10,000 person business again. I've done it. I didn't enjoy
yeah.
it. It wasn't a dynamic or a culture I liked. So if OC ever gets to thousands and thousands of people, I won't be running it.
Mm.
And that's fine because it's not the role
It's
or
not
the
for
position
you.
we want to do. It's not for everyone. It's not forever.
I think that's it's. I mean, you're dead right, and it's quite interesting. Even at Triodos now, we've got, as I said earlier, like an incredibly loyal and passionate co-worker base. And that has meant that when certain coworkers have left, there's a bit of a shock factor. Like what's going on? Is something going wrong in the organization? But to your point, I really believe as leaders, one of the greatest things that we can do is help people train up and be ready for their next role, wherever that is. It might not be in our organizations because the organization might not be big enough or might not have all of those opportunities. But for somebody to be able to be ready and leave well, proud of what they've done, but also as an advocate for your organization, I think is a critical role for us all to play.
One of my rules on that is if anyone ever wants to leave, we will help them find the job of their dreams. Please just tell us.
Yeah.
We'll never ask you to stay. We'll never try and put you in a position you don't want to. And actually, I'm super fortunate. I've got this incredible cohort of people at the start of their career, many of which are sat in the room. Hey guys, and I've said to them, when you are ready to do your own thing, all I ask is let me be your first investor.
Yeah.
We'll come and help you launch that
Yeah.
because what's the alternative? Try and keep people against their will,
Yeah.
like
Exactly.
doesn't help
Exactly.
anyone, does it?
This It doesn't know. No.
So January 24,
January 24. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And you walked into Triodos and you mentioned earlier that that culture hit you on day one,
Yeah.
but you weren't in there long before the top seat became available.
No, I wasn't. No, I mean, yeah, as I say, like I genuinely on day one, like just there was this human connectivity, and I've used the phrase. It felt like I just entered the best of humanity, and that's and now I use the phrase. I feel like I've come home. I do feel like I've come home,
Have you
being
got
able to do
any
this.
idea the effect that clip's going to have when your team see you say that?
I'm glad, but they should be proud of themselves. I just walked through the door. They were already there. They were already doing their thing before I even got there. Um, But it's nice of you to say that. You're right. I felt, as I said, like I felt when I joined Triodos that everything I'd learned over 4 years of Unity just fell into place really quickly. So there was the leadership side from HSBC, and then there was huge sort of breadth and technical learning from Unity. And one of the things in particular was the learning about agile programs, how to lead change effectively and well. That was an organization also going through a lot of change. And so I think that helped me get to Triodos and see the things that needed to be done really quickly, build credibility both with the senior team and with the board. But you are right. I think I was only technically enrolled for 5 months before, Bevis, obviously after 10 years, 10 hard years, decided to step down. So there was quite a moment to reflect on, am I going to go for this or not? Because there was a big bit of me felt absolutely felt ready. And there's a bit of me felt, yeah, you've only been here 2 minutes, Mark. Um, uh, uh, but I think I knew, Richie, if I didn't go for it, I'd regret it. Even if you didn't get it, I'd regret not going for it in the end.
My I think it's different in an entrepreneurial world, but in a more of a corporate setting, my advice to anyone would be apply for every job you're interested in, as long as there's not political things that make it disrespectful in any way, or if you're the most junior person in the business, you probably don't want to apply for the CEO job of a 10,000 person organization. But as long as it's plausible within the range of things, you will learn so much about yourself for that
Yeah,
process, for prepping your materials, for analyzing how much you've progressed in a period. I'd always recommend people
yeah,
engaging with a process
yeah.
just for your own development.
I agree with that. I mean, and I certainly remember advising a number of people over the years to say, I know this job might not be quite the one you want, but think about the people who are going to interview you. and the reputation you can create for yourself in this moment and the network that you can build. And, so there's something often that's bigger than that job, but it's about then the next one that will come along where you can be the person that people think about straight away.
My brain's going back to so many. I used to love interviews. So I mean, it's a privilege getting to interview people on the podcast, but I much prefer being interviewed because being put on the spot and asking those questions, I love that. Oh, I hadn't thought about that before, and exploring a new thought. You did highlight one of the challenges with taking on a new leadership role. You're only ever in a new role for two reasons. One, because the person's been really successful and has left, or because the person's done terribly and has left. But either way, you need to be very careful on deciding what to change, what to leave the same,
Yeah,
and when to do it.
yeah.
How did you think about that process? How did you think about balancing the success and keeping what was great about the business versus having your impact on what you wanted to change?
Yeah, it's a great question. And probably still going through a bit of a process with this. I'm sort of 7 months into role, but a role that I hope to be in for many years. And so I've spent a lot of time reflecting and getting to know the broader business over the last few months because whilst I was a COO and I knew various parts of the bank, I also recognized coming into role lots of parts of the business I didn't know. There's lots of people I didn't know.
What percentage of the whole piece do you think you were cited on as COO versus CEO?
Well, I ran a third of it effectively.
Okay.
So that's probably the thing. And obviously, I'd have some insight into the other teams, but it's not as deep, it's fair to say. And now, obviously, it needs to be deeper across the whole bank. So I've deliberately spent time to really reflect on the business. I do something now every month, which is a CEO coffee chat that's starting with like just co-workers in all different teams in the business, and eventually it'll be just become a mix of co-workers. But to really be able to hear from people and understand their perspectives, what's going on the ground, to really help inform my thinking. Um, so um, so there's a big element of that. Obviously, coming into role and not being new to Bank Rich, I'd already have some sense of things that I might want to change or might want to accelerate. But I've spent some time to think it through, and now I'm now really actively engaging with my senior team on the things that I'd really like to do now slightly differently, or as we shape the organisation. But none of it is with the intent to lose any of our DNA, any of our mission, and everything I'm thinking about really is about the intent to how do we grow our impact further? 'Cause you're right, I've picked up a great solid foundation. It's underpinned by impact. Without impact, our reason for exist doesn't is not there. So for me, it's kind of leaning into impact and leaning into advocacy, as opposed to your point. There's nothing that needs to be ripped up and started again. But we can pack a bigger punch than we're packing today, and that in the end is probably where I want to be able to say that whenever my time comes to an end, there that I've managed to do it.
The advocacy bit's a fascinating point because banks and the financial sector in general, the idea of risk, the idea of putting head above the parapet, of saying you're about something, you're not supposed to do that, right? That's
Mm,
not the standard operating procedure. It's
yeah.
everyone stays the same, head down. Where on earth does the bravery as a bank and you personally come from to say, no, 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 we're going to stand up for what we believe in?
Well, I mean, it lies in the heart of being a values-based organisation in the end, because I think you're right. I think our view would be that banks have a choice. You can operate to make profit. Everyone has to make profit, but it can be your prime goal. Or you can recognize that you have to balance profit with people and planet, and you have to put people and planet first in the end. Otherwise, in the end, everybody loses, right? So I think just that conviction alone and understanding that is your license to say, right, this is not right. I think there's also, I mentioned earlier, like the independent thinking within the group gives you like real insight and a point of differentiation to be able to go to market on. Um, and that's really interesting because I'm not an economist, but I find it fascinating to read some of the work that Triodos publishes because it's directly challenging the financial system. And I think you're right, most organizations will back the system that they're in. And we're an organization that will challenge the system that we're in. That's actually, I find that really empowering. I love the idea of going against the status quo. There's a little there's a little rebel in me somewhere that sort of this sort of role helps to tease it out.
I think we might have just found a title for your podcast,
Yeah.
The Rebel CEO. I've seen that in your style already. So the vast majority of people who would have taken on a role like yours would have gone more insular to start with, I think. What I was super impressed with, so early in your time, you came to see us here. You were out seeing all the
Yeah.
customers, understanding the business. That's a really brave thing to do because, as I say, I think everyone else would have rushed towards their senior team that have spent days listening to everyone in the office. They wouldn't have come out first.
Yeah.
What made you make that decision? I want to be out and understanding the sort of public face and the customer side of what we do.
Um, I think I would have done it anyway, like just consciously, because as I say, like time to reflect with coworkers, you need the same time to reflect with customers and really understand your customer base well and what drives them. And you're right, I've absolutely loved it. I also recognize that I get huge energy from it. I mean, every customer visit is different, but everyone, you get a moment there that says, "This is why I'm doing it." Stood in the fields down at Monaco and watching how meadows are being recreated and woodland is being restored. It's like, this is why I'm here. Last week I was with a company called Vitso who makes some of the most uh, uh, sustainable furniture effectively. And walking around their factory and their processes is like, yeah, this is why I do it. We get the we've talked a lot about a business we support called Chimpanzees up in Bristol, the world's first dedicated play centre for disabled children. And when Stephanie, who's running the business, talked about the experiments that chimpanzees ran to create their business model, where children for the first time would smile or for the first time would lift their head. So creating moments for families, you're like, this is why we do it. So I get massive energy, but it also does help shape our thinking about where our support should be. I think some of it also, the rich, came from our 30th anniversary event that we had earlier in 2025, where in the room there was this sort of ecosystem of partners of Triodos. Some would be sort of NGOs, charities, some would be direct businesses, and there was incredible energy in the room. And I was sort of blown away actually by the energy in the room because I've never experienced it on that level before. But I was getting to meet loads of customers, and you just sat thinking, I've got to go there, I've got to go there, I've got to go there. So I made on that night in May a whole bunch of customer commitments, and as of last week, I delivered the last one. So I've got out over the last few months, and then we'll sort of rekindle it next year at some point. But I think it's critical as my role because it's not just for my personal energy, but it's the playback to the bank. So as you know, when I kind of came out to see yourself, very often I will sort of just shoot a totally ad hoc impromptu video. This is what I'm doing. This is why we exist. This is what I'm learning. And it's a way of engaging the whole organization and bringing all your co-workers in to understand more about why we exist. Because on a day-to-day basis, it's not easy for everyone to understand that, depending on the roles that you're doing.
I'm so glad you told that story because I was going to if you didn't. I think that capturing that moment. You coming to visit us, the energy was like you could tell how much you loved the engagement with nature and what we were doing. In fact, I challenge people when they listen to this to reflect back on how many ecosystem, nature, connectivity. Your language is just full of references to environmental stuff.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. But when you were here, you were like, oh, grabbing a moment to capture what you were doing and sharing it back. That sense of awareness and that sense of giving is just so authentically you, and I love that you made that a feature, and it wasn't actually just that you were coming to visit us, you were bringing the whole bank with you by
Yeah.
doing that, which was just
Yeah.
awesome, so
When we shot the video, by the way, I know you and I were stood by the lake, which obviously is now emptied. I
yeah.
was going to bring my fishing rods, but anyway, and you gave an explanation of how biodiversity net gain works. And despite the fact that Triodos Bank has been running nature-based solutions for some while, I sat there thinking, I know a lot of people won't know how it works because they're not close to it day to day. So when that sort of video went out, across the bank, a number of people came to say that was really helpful, Mark, because I now understand it. I didn't understand it before; I just knew that we did it. So you're right. I think, and actually, maybe one of the things on my personal journey that I missed earlier, Rich, is that right from a young age, I've had a real passion for the natural world and the environment, and a real frustration from a very young age about mankind's or humankind's ability to pillage and create destruction and not recognize what we're doing to sort of the planet. So I think that's always been in me as well, and hence loving being out, seeing what you guys are doing.
It's a beautiful segue into the bank's made quite an ambitious commitment for 500 million invested and lent into nature-based solutions by 2030. Can you talk to that a little?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely recognize that effectively, um, without a healthy planet, we will not a healthy economy. We won't have healthy and prosperous people, and so we think it has to be at the forefront of our thinking and our drive, and that's why over about 10 years, I think Triodos has developed nature-based solutions. We also recognize, I think, that no NGO and no government is big enough or has deep enough pockets to solve this problem alone. And, if you look for all of the good things that are happening, we're not yet winning, is probably how I would describe it. And so our view is the financial system has got to lean in to support nature and recognize for the health of all of us, this is absolutely critical. And that for us then is about creating, ecosystem sustainability that supports the economy, society, and the planet. And in fact, just this week, we've released a white paper on the nature-based solutions sector and the different ways of financing it. So it's publicly available on our website should anyone want to take a look. And we do many things. So we sort of define nature-based solutions across 5 categories. So there's an agriculture category, so the land, soil, biodynamic, the move to organic, for example. We have a forestry category, which obviously is the replenishment or creation of new woodland and woodland carbon credits, for example. We then have fresh water as a category, so that could be peatland, freshwater, flood management, and those 3 categories, I think, in the UK is where we spend most of our time and energy at the moment, and where we see the opportunities. We then have a 4th category, which is around marine. So, globally, that could be about protecting coral reefs. In the UK, it could be about planting of seagrass, for example. Um, and then lastly, there's an urban category, which we'd love to develop more of, but that could be like natural cooling systems, green roofs, etc., etc. So there's a whole range of things that form nature-based solutions. And then the commitment that we've got across the bank covers all sorts of different entities. So it's worth knowing, of course, not just the UK, but we've also got branches in Spain, Belgium, our home markets in the Netherlands. So all of those markets are also looking to develop and grow out their nature-based solutions portfolio.
Yeah, that passion from you, we've heard it across your European
Yeah.
teams as well. I did an event just before Bevis left with your European board, and we had the most incredible experience with one of your colleagues from Norway, I think, coming up after I did this keynote saying, "Look, my neighbour was messaging me about this project." I mean, I couldn't read the messages in Norwegian, but she was like, "Look, these are you guys and us together. This is brilliant." And that passion and support from Triodos, we felt Europe wide,
Yeah.
so it is
Yeah,
it is
and that's
echoed.
fantastic. And it's pan-Triodos as well. So, in terms of what makes up the 500 million euros, in a UK context, we often think about direct lending to customers, as an impact lender, and in that mix can also be crowdfunding.
Plus,
So
within there, you've supported us, you've supported BNG-based products. We've talked about renewable energy before. So you are spanning each of those sort of 5 pillars you talked about.
yes, that's right. It covers all the different transition themes, making sure that one theme never plays off against the other. Um, and so there's sort of crowdfunding raises alongside lending, and then sort of we've also got, for example, something in the Netherlands called the Triodos Regenerative Money Centre, which can deliver funding for businesses who might not yet be ready for debt in a conventional banking sense, but where we're willing to take much higher risk with those funds. So I know, for example, the TRMC recently supported an organisation called Treevive, which is looking to unlock effectively what they saw as bottlenecks in the restoration of tropical rainforests around the world. Um, at a local level, and this is not part of the 500 million commitment, I should say, we've also got the Triodos Foundation in Bristol that looks to give grant funding again across all of the transition themes, but that could include nature based solutions. And then we've got Triodos Investment Management, it's our investment management arm. And the TIM arm, as we call it, can provide impact debt and equity to organizations. So, again, maybe a recent example would be a Kenyan organization called Limbua, who effectively, I think they're supporting 9,000 smallholders growing organic macadamia nuts. So there's a big investment there. And the investment management will also support things like green bonds. So we've delivered some green bonds across Europe. And then we are, I think in 2020, it's going to launch some actual investment funds where retail investors can invest in funds designed for nature-based solutions. So the 500 million commitment, it's a massive commitment for the bank. I think I'm right in saying we're the only bank still anywhere that's done it, Rich. I've not seen anything
Nor have
else.
I. Nor have I.
And it covers a range of things from lending to investment management to grant funding to contributions. So it's really broad in the way that we're trying to build out the nature-based solutions offering.
Love it. You talked about advocacy before, and there's one type of advocacy that I think goes unrecognized, and it's you guys have kindly supported us with what, to the best of our knowledge, is still the biggest debt funding package around conservation. But that's not the end of the story. It's the start of the story, because what we're finding at the moment is we are operating nature-based solutions at a scale and a speed that the sector was never intended to do. It was almost meant for NGOs and charitable organizations. We have concurrently got four of the biggest woodland creation and peatland restoration projects happening in Scotland at the same time. So where your team have been brilliant is helping advocate for how revenues are recognized, how charges are structures around debt with different things. So I think the important thing for people to recognize is it's not one funding deal and stop. It's
Yeah,
constant conversation and constant
yeah,
help and adjustment. And we're all having to try and change things within the sector and system to make these things a reality.
yeah.
Has that presented in other sectors beyond the nature-based solution with you as well? Is it often that you're having to almost lay the tracks as the train's going along?
I think it really depends. I mean, if you think about some of our sectors, if you take, for example, the wellbeing sector, where we do a lot of stuff in healthcare in particular, they're pretty established sectors. Housing associations, social housing, pretty established sectors. A good example could be the energy sector. So the energy sector is massive, massive. But I think Triodos has carved itself out a really positive niche in community-based energy, with all of the benefits that can give to a local community. And those deals can often be smaller and fit within the criteria that Triodos want to run at. But again, the team will often talk about every single bit like nature-based solutions. Every deal is quite bespoke.
Yeah.
And the uniqueness of the bank is to be able to deal with that bespokeness and run at it. And therefore, it feels like it's transformative and more running at system change. I mean, the broader answer to your question actually is I think the more we can find those transformative deals, the more that's more likely to be true. And definitely one of the things I feel sort of a sense of responsibility for is that, we are not just an impact lender, but a transformative impact lender. And, nature-based solutions is an amazing legacy for Bevis. And I often sit and think, well, what will mine be? Where will my transformative impact play be? Because we will obviously continue to expand in our core sectors. And I want to make sure that by the time I sort of hang up my boots, that there's something else in the model again that's seeking to transform society.
I think yours is going to be the intersection of nature, the environment, and the tech side of things. I think your background, what I love about you sort of telling your story is it just brings us together to where we are now. And I think because of your COO side of things, because of how you've overseen change in the business, because we are in the time of AI, we are going to see those tech things influence your passion, which is nature and the environment more.
Yeah.
So I can totally see that being a niche for Triodos, because those tech companies that are starting to bubble up, the Mosaic Earth, the Tree Economy, those type of businesses, they're not of a scale that will attract it's not like investing in OpenAI or things like that. And it is so rooted in positive impact. So I can totally see you finding your element of that.
Oh, that's interesting. We should connect on that then, because you're probably closer to some of those firms than I will be today.
Hmm.
That's really interesting
How
to explore.
how is AI and the changes we're seeing in tech influencing banking in general, and maybe Triodos?
Oh, it's absolutely enormous. If you think about the digitization of banking and actually lots of industries over my career. I think, in fact, I'm not even sure the internet existed when when I first started in 1996. I don't know when the internet came along, but
So we've got this amazing new estate ranger up in Scotland called James. He was Boy Scout of the Year. He's won awards for young people in sustainability. He's one of those people you meet, and he's in his early 20s, and genuinely he's 40 years old. What he's covered, it's not possible. James, shout out, you're astonishing. James kindly read the manuscript of my second book to give us some feedback on it. And there's a phrase in there about dial-up internet, and he just wrote, "What's that?" And I was like, "Oh my God."
oh, I
That
did for
that
years.
I know exactly. I can still hear the
Yeah,
tone, right?
yeah, exactly.
That's how old we're getting.
Exactly. I mean, obviously, AI is another form of digitalization. But if I think about AI and then just think about sort of the broader digitalization, AI obviously is here to stay. It can be absolutely used for good, and we have at the group level very specific AI governance that's run so that we understand what are all of the use cases for which AI could be right at Triodos, and then we will assess each one on a case by case basis for prioritization and whether it's something that we'd want to build. Accepting that, even as a sort of a small to medium sized bank, you can't build it all. You've got to be really thoughtful and focused about where you can best spend your money. We're also, interestingly, because it's AI and because AI can have bias, and because AI uses enormous amounts of power, it's quite interesting that what I've observed at Church is how our co-workers will hold us to account on the ethics in a way that I suspect doesn't happen in most organizations. People just want the next sort of shiny tool. So, the bank will be very thoughtful about the power being used in the data centers from which we will source our AI. And at the same time, our co-workers will talk to us not that they don't have to, but it's really nice that they will, about the risk of bias and ethics, and always want to know the way the bank is developing AI in a way that doesn't cause some of the media headlines that we've seen for some other companies, including some other banks. And then digitalization and what that's given us is absolutely off the scale. I mean, this year, alone in our um, personal current account, or over the last 12 months, we've launched Apple Pay, we've launched Google Pay, we've launched Visa Click to Pay. So there's all sorts of things that we need to keep up with. But I think what I always find interesting when you look at the world, particularly in personal banking, is it's really important to know what your customers want and not to feel that you have to follow the herd and everybody else. I mean, at Unity, I had a fantastic user experience designer called Chris, and Chris would say to me, I've been on this call, Mark, with loads of banks, and it just feels like that when one bank develops something, everyone feels they've got to follow and develop it, but they don't even know why they're doing it. It's just like, well, if that competitor's got it, we've got to have it. And I suspect there is some of that. And I think certainly if you look at the world of digitalization in banking, it could absolutely frighten the life out of you to try and keep up with all of it. But I think that customers come to Triodos for a specific reason, which is to do good with their money. Customers won't tolerate poor service, and they won't tolerate, in the end, a bank that just feels like constantly digitally behind. So we have to be really thoughtful about how we maintain that, but we also have to recognise that we're not trying to be the next fintech. That's not the space in which we're operating. We have to talk to our customers, work out the things that customers really want from a digital perspective, and make sure we stay really focused. And I think that's actually the key for lots of organizations, not trying to develop everything and throw your money everywhere, being really focused on just what your customer wants in the end.
So I wrote this piece that's title is, and Abby, who is my editor in chief, might change it, but its current title is "Why You Shouldn't Make Every Improvement in a Business." Now, I don't know if you'll have seen this because you're running a much bigger business than us, but there's a temptation to try and make every change and every improvement you
Yeah.
can. The clearest way I've seen the need to evaluate this comes from Formula One. So they literally set a monetary value on a tenth of a second. So they say, we'll make the change if we can improve a tenth of a second by £500,000 or 250,000, because they have a salary cap and a cost cap, sorry. It's not just can they make the improvement, but is it too expensive to make it worthwhile because they've got to let that budget last the year? Do you see scenarios where there are opportunities to improve things in the business and change things, but actually you think monetarily, energy, culture-wise, actually it's too expensive a improvement to make that it doesn't represent good value?
Yeah, I absolutely do, and it's actually something that we want to get better at as a business, which is actually being clear on the values. And sometimes it's monetary, and sometimes there's other value that's been given.
Yeah, sometimes
But
your people are just exhausted. Now's
correct,
not the time to add another change to their load.
correct, exactly that. And so I think the analysis of that and the discovery work that sits behind it is absolutely critical. And what is true, I think, of any organisation, and it's certainly true of us, is there are more ideas being generated at any one point in time than we can actually manage from a technical perspective. So you always have to prioritise and work out, where do you want to kind of effectively spend not just your money, but it's people's time and effort and energy. To your point, and so we've done, as I say, we've done an awful lot in the retail space, but I'm also conscious as an impact bank, a lot of our impact is in the lending space. So I think also was working that dynamic about how do we run a solid retail business, but how do we not ignore the changes and improvements we need for the lending journey for customers, for example. So there's always a trade-off and prioritization going on all of the time. Um, the other thing though that I'm trying to do, and in the bank this year, is to run at continuous improvement in a way that empowers co-workers and recognizes that not everything needs technology, not everything needs a project manager. And I'm absolutely convinced in the end that in all of our teams, all of our co-workers know what needs to be done. The question is can we give them the confidence to believe that it can be done and give them some structure and thinking and time. And so we're trying to run continuous improvement as well, simultaneous to say it's not all about technology. And just as an example this year is a small example, Rich, but we kind of set ourselves, it's very much an internal target of can we save 20,000 hours of time this year through co-worker led improvements? And we're already well past it by November. But that's just the start of something. Effectively, that in the end won't be successful until we've brought it into a culture that says people are looking for this all of the time. They understand how to raise it. They believe something will be done with it. And so that's the other side of sort of change in prioritization that I really want to, embed into the business.
One of my phrases that the team call bingo on, because I use it so much, is everybody knows.
Yeah,
In a business, everybody knows.
yeah,
Everyone knows who's good. Everyone knows who's not quite keeping up. Everyone knows who's there first and leaves earliest or stays latest or the best at this or the worst at that. Everybody knows. It's
yeah,
just people don't acknowledge it enough.
yeah,
And the same is true of where's the waste, where's the thing that needs to be improved. And the people have the answer. It's just
yeah,
empowering them to get it done and actually celebrating the times when they try and it doesn't quite work.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's a huge amount of that. It's sort of building in fact, I actually just this week not sort of I released a video. It's a bank-wide video which will involve lots of group directors, but it's titled about making mistakes. So I talked in the video about, it's a short video, but like one big mistake I feel I've made in the last few years and the impact and consequence of that, but trying to encourage people to recognize that failing fast, learning quickly is an asset. Being able to talk about these things is a point of credibility. It's not a point of shame. And actually, organizations that are really agile and doing well, of course, do that really well. So I think there's a lot in that culturally.
Do you find is the video the medium that you prefer to communicate over? Is that your go-to?
Uh, well, that's a great question. It has become a go-to, and I don't know why. Like, I'm not some sort of I'm not some sort of media star, but I mean, this video was professionally shot. But something I do, just completely ad hoc, as we're talking later,
Yeah.
is, and very often on a Friday morning, I just take my phone camera down the garden, sit somewhere, and just share a message with coworkers about things that we've been up to, customers that I might be in to visit. And what I've found is it's a really good way of being very authentic in who you are and being able to communicate and get yourself closer to your team. So I've found that a really helpful medium, but I found it much more helpful to me personally when it's not scripted. And so if I trip over my words, it doesn't matter.
It's authentic.
It's just like we all trip over our words. If I say just the wrong thing, it's like, well, it doesn't matter either. I'm not going to reshoot it. I'm just going to shoot it as it is. And I feel that that's been well received in the bank, and it does help me get close to teams that I can't be with on a daily basis. Not the only answer, I should say, but I have found it a really helpful mechanism. But one, I mean, you probably found the same issue in the podcast. One that you learn over time. I mean, the very first time I used to do it from time to time when I was at HSBC, and again when I'd got a very big team, and that temptation to think, "Oh, I need to reshoot it. It needs to be perfect." You start there, and then you eventually like, "No, no, no, I don't need to do any of that," and it's really time consuming.
I'm gonna regret telling this story, because Penny's in the room. Our head of operations, Dave, I've known for 20 years, my longest surviving best mate, and he went and found the first piece I ever did to camera in my career, and I do not cut it into a vlog. Penny looks like it's Christmas, like hearing that. I'm atrocious, absolutely atrocious, and I think we get a millimeter better every day, right?
Yeah,
And you just got to try and practice those things. It was
yeah,
I think you take a brief incredibly well. Like when we had you down at the sort of BNG area, the wetland work we were doing, you and I spoke for 5 minutes. You then explained BNG in 60 seconds like a professor on ecology. It was brilliant. So you should give yourself some
well,
credit
that's
for
very
that.
kind because I wouldn't have thought that necessarily. Do you know what I mean? Just
I was
like,
in awe. I was like,
crikey, I'm going to get through
wow,
this.
an AI quality summary. And you kindly often interact with some of my written pieces on LinkedIn, and it got me thinking about. I think I haven't got a table that says what the type of topic or subject matter is, and the medium or mechanism we communicate over. Because some things lend themselves naturally well to a podcast conversation, other things are a long form written thing. I'm really enjoying the vlog now for
Yeah,
interacting with people. We've had 6 or so of them out. I'm looking at the team. Yeah. So it is interesting which of those tools we use for different mechanisms.
yeah.
Do you write much?
Um, I try and do something on LinkedIn every week. Um, and sometimes it's just simply me going like I'm going to say going AWOL. It's not the right phrase, but without the permission of the comms, because our comms team like Mark, we really want to know what you're going to put out there. Sometimes like, well, I'm going to do it anyway, and then sometimes I'll work with them very actively to make sure that the
You
content
can
is right,
tell
the
the difference of
messaging
our
is right.
comms team. Elle's punching the air when you're going AWOL off screen rather than yeah.
You know it, yeah, exactly. But again, that obviously plays to some of your authenticity, and then I really like to share a mix of messages on LinkedIn. So some of it is, for example, about those customer visits and sort of what I've learned. And other times it is the advocacy and the things that we want to do in terms of policy change or an observation on the world around us. And I do think it's a really important medium to get your voice out there. And as much as anything as well, is to share your voice back into your own organization because
Mm.
obviously your co-workers will see what you're putting out there. So I think although it feels like it's an external comms mechanism, it's actually also an internal comms mechanism.
Um, you're 100% right about. So whenever I come off stage, so we're fortunate enough to ask to speak somewhere every week. So saying a lot of no's at the moment, but when we do go do things, as soon as I come off stage, my question to the team is, "Are you happy with that?" Because in my head, when I'm on stage, I'm them. I'm the
Yeah,
voice of the business
yeah,
and the team and representing them.
yeah,
So if they're happy with how I've presented OC, I'm like, tick,
yeah.
that's what we want in terms of the
I
box.
feel exactly the same. I actually feel blessed. We've got a brilliant communications team, and they are passionate, and they're advocates. And I do absolutely want to know to your point that when I've done something, and they actually work really hard for me in terms of messaging and language as well, that they feel that I've landed it. I feel I've done a good job if they feel that I've landed it.
Do you ever have the challenge of you have a vision or a view that something should be one way, and the comms team are quite strong the other? Have you ever had that one yet where you've had to go, I just need to give them the win because it's more important for them to feel that way? And
Yeah, there is a little. I mean, obviously, I've not loads yet, Rich, but there's an example, and therefore won't share it only to give them the win.
yeah,
But I shared an example with Ed, our head of communications, about something that I got to experience at HSBC, and it was a wonderful experience. And I felt for me like it was a really personal moment. And Ed is like, it just feels like a rich person with a, sort of coming in with like a savior mentality. I'm like, right, I won't share the example. So I've not shared the example, but it was like, right, even though I think it's important, Ed's given me a view that says, "That's how it sounds, Mark." That's the win. Yeah.
Yeah. I because I think if you don't give the ground there, you won't get the challenge next
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And I'm in a really fortunate position where I don't have to watch an edit. I don't have to watch anything else
Yeah.
because the team will take out the things and it'll save me from me where
Yeah.
I'll slip a phrase or a sentence that in context is fine, but taken out of context might present badly.
I agree.
So that's why you have to hire people
Yeah.
smarter than
There's
you
a
and
reason
ask
why
them
all
what
of
to
these
do.
people are experts in communications and we're not, even
And
if
we're
we think
not.
we are.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
completely agree.
Yeah.
Um, how much do you think talent attraction into Triodos is part of your role?
I mean, massively. I mean, obviously, there's a, I guess there's a culture and a tone piece, and then there's separately, obviously, at a senior level. I will connect with a lot of people, even though I might not have any roles available, to start building out that network and think about future talent that as talent will
Do you have a
come in.
mental bench in your head that if you had a gap, there's one, two, three, or four people you're like, oh, it'd be great to have them in the business?
If I think about some roles, I would say that I've got it, and then I'd say there are other roles where I haven't necessarily got it, and that's part of my sort of timing role and building out my network and contacts. I think, but I think in an ideal position you would, and actually, to be fair as well, Rich, we write sort of succession plans across the organisation, so we also know who all of the internal talent is that we'd like to bring through the organisation and sort of bring up into senior roles. So you've got a blend of the two as well, I think. For me, I think there's something around talent attraction and the way that I would interview. I'd love to kind of be able to spend more time talking and thinking about, is this the way that we do it at Traders? And I can't say that we're there yet, but certainly for me personally, um, I look for attitude every day of the week. There's a view of, and certainly for the roles I might recruit for, you can look at someone's CV and then they've got the technical skills. You have to test them at interview, but it really shouldn't be difficult. For me, there's a thing in terms of talent attraction about attitude. Absolutely, there's a piece about values and behaviours that should be really tested, and certainly from a Triodos perspective, we will want to know that people who are coming in and tell us they like what Triodos stands for are also living those values in their personal life. And we'll test that as a part of an interview process. And then some of the things we touched on earlier, which perhaps just wrap under the banner of growth mindset, is people's willingness to experiment, people's willingness to talk about mistakes that they've made and not think of that as a weakness. The levels of curiosity and learning, the learning journeys and coaching journeys that people are going through. One of the things for me when I interview, which I never, this has killed many a reasonable interview, is asking somebody what their skills development areas are, and then finding that people can't give you an answer. I find that quite alarming. I know I've got lots of skills development areas and everybody has. Like nobody is perfect. And if you come into an interview and you don't know what your development areas are, I'm like, there's something not right in terms of your attitude to learning or development, at least in my opinion. And I'd want people to be able to articulate that really well. So there's a lot sort of culturally about the mindset of an individual that I'd want to bring in. And so that's sort of that's the way that I think. I probably have a lot more to do, I'd say, in terms of, is that the way that we recruit everywhere across the organization? I think there's probably work to do.
Everyone, through the passage of time, whether people are stood on a treadmill, whether they've got earphones in listening to this conversation, they will be screaming at me to ask him what his areas of development are after you set that up. So what are yours, Mark?
Well, one of the things I reflected on earlier is uh, that I can over reflect and overthink. And so one of the things that comes as feedback I've had many times say, Mark, can you stop procrastinating? Can you just make a decision and get on with it? We need to move forward. Stop asking for more data, Mark. Stop asking for more analysis. I know that is, well, I'll have many, but that is an example, which would be a really big development area for me. I actively work on it. I know actually I'm not good at saying well done as often as I should do. Sort of my
That
natural.
genuinely surprises
Yeah,
me.
I know, but there's sort of, I love insights as a framework, and I'm sort of green blue. So the green bit in me is very people oriented. The blue bit is sort of very sort of fact based, for example. And I've not got as much insight yellow in as you might think. But as you know, like when you're in roles, you operate outside of your natural colours all of the time. So, so it's not that I never do it. I don't do it often enough. And part of it is because, the feedback I've had in the past is, Mark, you set the bar really high, and therefore we've got to really jump through hoops before you feel we've done a great job. And we think we've done a great job way before we've got there. And that over many years I've had that feedback, and I'm really thoughtful of it. And therefore I do try to correct myself, which I really think, particularly at co-worker level, about moments where I need to kind of drop a line, make a call to say, Welton, but I have to put a lot of energy into it. It doesn't come naturally to me.
Really interesting. Um, I hate insights.
I love insights.
I I think that's probably because I'm carrying the experience of being weaponized in the public sector.
Yeah. Right.
So they would put a color on you
Yeah.
because it was a way of labeling you and criticizing you that they were allowed to do that didn't constitute bullying.
Yeah.
And there was a failure to understand that people do operate across those color spectrums,
Yeah.
or and it got so ridiculous in the end. People had introduced themselves as, oh, I'm blue yellow, or I'm what's the Myers-Briggs one, EJK, or what.
Yes.
You'd be like,
TJ. Yeah. Whatever.
hello,
Yeah.
I'm Richard, nice to meet
Yeah.
you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, it was just so tiresome. And I've actually gone full circle. I think at a senior level, my view is it's pointless. And if you sat me or any of the senior team down and said, answer this as green or blue or yellow, they could. I think, but you need to go through, certainly earlier in your career, a few loops of that to understand some self-awareness from it. I think
Yeah.
it adds a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
I love it for the simplicity of it. So you're right. I could never remember all the Myers-Briggs stuff,
yeah.
but the simplicity of the colours I really like. It's not perfect. I'm not suggesting it is. I love it to your point because it's not about labeling somebody for me, but it's about recognizing their individual strengths and where people might need to be better. And that's not a criticism because all of us have we're somewhere
When
else on
it's
that
used well,
dynamic.
it helps communication.
Exactly that. And the thing to your point on at a senior level, where I'd probably take a slightly different view is, and I don't know, I don't know whether my team would agree with me, by the way, is very often if I see, I mean, I've got a really well gelled senior team, but where I see moments of friction, I can very quickly pull on, this is where you are, and this is where you are. And this is why the friction is like different communication styles are approaching. And again, that's not to criticize, but sometimes I might talk to my team to say, you're here, they're there. Like when you got that insights profile, it says this is how you communicate or talk to different sort of colors. Like you don't have to do it that way, but
Yeah.
there's help and guidance. And so I just find it helpful in terms of diagnosing some of the things that I see, even at a senior level. Not to say it's perfect, and not to say the team might always accept it, but I often look through that lens and find it quite helpful.
Where are you on 360 feedback as a concept?
Uh, as a concept, I really like it, but I
We're going to
say
fall out on this
but.
one as well.
I'm gonna say a but. I'll tell you why, because if it's used really well and just gives you a range of things to think about, to say, like, I could develop over here, I could develop over there, here's things, then I think it's another tool and it's helpful. It is not the end of anything. My but moment is the first time I ever did a 360 feedback, which was 20 years ago, it was weaponized against me, to your point. And it stopped me from being put onto what was sort of a talent program at the time, because I felt I'd inherited a team at the time that needed an awful lot of work. It was really difficult, and it needed a lot of drive and a lot of energy. And less than 12 months in, we did a 360, and I felt I was having to manage some really hard situations, and those individuals I felt, rightly or wrongly, played some of that back in the 360. And that 360 hurt me for years, such that the next time I did one, I was really fearful about the consequences of doing it. So I think to your point, it can be used really badly. If it's used well, then it's just helpful development and things for people to focus on.
Um, we're not going to disagree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I didn't actually have the bad experience. I had a colleague who had a very similar, was asked to solve a really difficult situation. And what happens is, because for those of you who don't know, 360 feedback is you ask loads of people that encounter you in different ways to anonymously give you feedback on things, which means you don't have the ability to ask for a clarification question
Yeah.
or give a piece of information. So say you've got someone who's managing a very difficult disciplinary issue, someone observes that situation, their experience is just one side of it, and you can't give any context or anything like that. And that individual really struggled with it. And my view on feedback is you need to be prepared to answer a question on it. So if you want to give someone feedback, and we've got a culture where that's constantly every day,
Yeah.
feedback has to be given, but you need to be prepared to answer a question. So,
Yeah.
oh, I didn't like the way you did that. Oh, brilliant. How could I have done it differently? Because
Mm.
without that, it's not a conversation.
Yeah.
My favorite analogy on feedback is it's a relay baton. If you're working as a team and you give feedback, you have to give it at the right time in the
Yeah.
right way the person can receive it. If not, you're just throwing a metal bar at somebody.
I know, and agree. I agree with that. I think it's a really good point. I mean, what I've often seen is 360 feedback can be outside of your most immediate peer group. So it can be people who might see you at a distance and what do they think and feel of you and your reputation. I think there can be help there. Um, I mean, what I've often, and I think if you think about a more junior level, where people might not be as confident in giving feedback, that it might feel like safer territory as people
Yeah.
develop. Um, at a more senior level, what I've often seen is people getting the survey and then actually reaching out to people who gave feedback, say, "Can I have a talk to you about the survey? And can you just give me a sense of where you were?" And I've seen it used in a much more
Oh,
mature way.
nice.
I mean, as an example of it with me, I've got the most wonderful support manager called Becca. Hi, Becca. Hi, Becca, wherever the cameras are. Becca did a 360 earlier this year as a part of we did a fantastic program called Lead that got all of our managers walking across the Netherlands effectively, across the group. And Becca was going on it, and I sort of completed the feedback, and Bevis would have. So effectively, Becca had like two managers. And so we just sat down and said, like, Becca, I'll just talk to you about all of the things I put. Here's why I put them. Here's the things that I could see in terms of things you're doing really well. Where might your development be? So to your point, we completed the process and then just talked about it all anyway.
Love it. And that's how it should be. I
Yeah.
think a conversation is the best way to do it. One thing I've encountered recently that I don't know if you've done yet that was the most amazing experience. So, one of our boards that we chair, I've moved that to one of our senior directors to chair instead of me. So, I attend as a statutory director, but I don't chair that board anymore. She does. And has anyone ever sat you down and taught you how to chair a board?
No.
They just expect you to
Yeah.
figure it out as you get there,
I
right?
know.
So we're now in this position whereby this director's stepping up. She did an amazing job, but I'm for the first time teaching how I would chair. And it makes you really reflect on how you do it and why you do it in your systems and processes.
Yeah.
So you start, it's kind of the medical analogy. I'm looking at Emily because her other half's a surgeon. You see one, do one, teach one as a analogy in the medical world. And I think until you start teaching something, you don't really introspectively look at how you're doing it.
Yeah.
It's Fee, our amazing property director, and she's from, oh, how on earth didn't I see that? I'm like, I didn't see it until I came to explain why I was thinking that way. I didn't know I did these
Mm.
things or thought about a meeting in a certain way, and I was able to teach a bit like your point about the colours with the people around that table. I was walking in with a mental map of what is the opinions, the tools, and the skill sets I want to allow these people to show, which are the topics that aren't great ones to bring these people in on because they're not strong in those areas, and what are the interactions with existing team members that would bring the best out of people in the subject matter and which really wouldn't help. But until someone exposes you to that, you don't think about the meeting, you just think about the timings and things.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's absolutely true, and you're right. Nobody teaches you.
There's
The
tons of
assumption is
stuff,
just know how
right?
to do it. Yeah, there's a couple of things that we're doing at the moment. One is, and we've done this for a long time, but we leave some time at the end of the agenda for all of our governance meetings at the senior level for a meeting review, where everyone has the opportunity to feedback very openly about how did this meeting go today. And that could be about, how could Mark have chaired it better or managed the time, but it could be actually just about observations of the room itself. And that's really helpful because in showing even observations of the room, it helps you start to learn about, well, how might I chair it better next time? And something that we're working on at the moment as a team is how do we avoid the risk of swirl around conversations, decisions, and being able to get decisions quicker and more easily. So something we're trialing at the moment is to effectively appoint somebody right at the start of the meeting that will be the observer and call out things in the moment that need to be better. So, to an extent, therefore, what that's doing is the chair is giving some formal responsibility to somebody else to effectively help you chair the meeting. Because you're right, when I'm trying to look at screens and papers and navigate and who's got their hand up here and there, it's quite difficult.
Um, not so me stepping away from chairing it is really hard
Mm.
because you have to bite your tongue. You have to. So I made a rule with myself. I'm going to go in. I'm not going to step into this role. I'm going to let things play out. I'm going to let it go. and I loved it. It was such a challenge because the amount of things that you have to go, nope, nope, just let it keep going. Just let it's not you. It's not your job. It's not your job. And it actually came from this leadership guru, a guy called Dan Martell, who's a US software and marketing and AI guy. And he teaches that because he spans so many businesses now, he doesn't chair any meetings. He's like, I don't want to think about the cadence, the flow of it. I want to contribute and observe the meeting and be very selective so that I don't over influence the conversation and decision. So, yeah, when you get the right one,
Mm.
being one that you're not, it's fascinating. It really changes the
I'll give that a
dynamic
try. Yeah, that is
for you.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Mark, what's the one question I haven't asked you you wish I had?
Will Sheffield Wednesday survive this season? Maybe that.
Not looking good, is it?
Not looking good at 27 points behind at this point in time. Yeah.
And
Glad you didn't go there.
isn't worse on the agenda? Isn't Mike Ashley trying to buy you?
Well, I mean, actually, I'm hopeful at some point later today we might know who's going to buy us,
Okay.
Rich. But and there's various names, of which his name is one of the people that's been put in the media. But I mean, the chances are we've no idea. I suppose, given that our former owner's just been banned from owning a football club for the next 3 years, if anybody wanted a lesson in how not to lead, then looking at my football club might be a good.
Would you like to lead a football club?
I would love it.
Yeah.
I would absolutely. I'd like to lead my football club. The challenge I have with it is I love football, but the game is morally and ethically bankrupt, in my view. If you think about the way that money flows in football, it is not transparent. If you think about the people who are allowed to go and own football clubs, it's not just my team. This summer Morecambe got into enormous trouble, and there's been many, many great names in football before that being ran into ground by different owners who shouldn't be at those football clubs. And the fact that they are allowed to be is a tragedy for the local communities of people. And you think about Bury that went under a few years ago, they were the heart of their local community. So it's not just about the football club, it's something much deeper than that. Um, and so I think there's something badly wrong in that sport as much as I absolutely love it. But I would love to be able to do something like that. And I did apply to be the COO of a major football club as I was leaving Unity. Just it came along. It was too good to be true. I didn't get an interview, I should say, because I had none of the relevant skills in football. But nevertheless, it was the notion of it. I've had a passion for it my whole life. But I'm glad we've talked about it now. But that was the question of.
I'll have a cricket club or a rugby club one day.
Will you?
Yeah.
You're gonna do it. Do you know where? Who?
No,
No?
I'm not sure yet. I just the sort of the cultural things we do, the data side of things that are applied so well across football so far, just aren't there yet on rugby and to a lesser extent cricket. Certainly in the IPL, it is. Yeah, I just think I'll end up with a rugby
I'm
club or a
surprised you
cricket
were
club.
not punching for an NFL team or something, or the next Formula One team. Have you thought
Penny's
about
like,
that?
yes, please, Formula One too. I think I always said my dream job, if I was ever to leave this, would to go be a general manager of an NFL team because it's the talent side of it. But actually, we've managed to steal so many of the tools and techniques and applied them to a different context here anyway. And my wife won't let me move to the US, so sadly we are where we are. Mark, I've immensely enjoyed our time today and always do love our conversations. Be amiss if I didn't do a shout out to your team, Simon, Laura, team that have helped us so much in terms of what we're doing. Thank you. You're brilliant. We really appreciate you. I think there's so many exciting conversations around 26, and I think our way of working with Triodos is only going to go from strength to strength. So thank you for everything.
My pleasure to be here as well. Thank you.